Hello, welcome to Z Marie Design. Let's create a scrappy fabric boho bag. So I usually save all of my scrap fabrics with fusible on the back that is left over from previous projects, and we will use that to create new fabric to make our boho bag. So to get started, I'm going to cut from muslin my boho bag pattern, and I'll leave a link in the description on how to draft this pattern. I will cut two of the muslin, one for the front and one for the back of the bag, and I will take all of that scrap fabric with the fusible on the back, and I'm going to just randomly place those pieces. I will start at the outer edge. I will remove that paper backing and start at the outer edge of that bag pattern, and I would continue to place all of these pieces of scraps all over this muslin until it's completely covered. Some of them I even overlapped because I just wanted to make sure that the muslin didn't show through. I'm going to fuse those in place, and then if I have to trim my bag pattern again, I'll do that. But now it's on to my sewing machine, and I will do this for the front part of the bag and the back. If you want, you can also, if you don't have any fusible scraps, you could just use a fusible fleece and just lay down your scraps of fabric and just fuse it to your fleece. So next I'm going to just use a straight stitch, and I'm going to just follow the width of my presser foot, and I'm going to sew horizontal straight stitch lines, and then I will come back and I will sew in between each of those lines. And then I'll come back a third time and I'll sew in between those lines. I just want to get those stitches as close together as I can to make sure that all of my scraps are completely sewn down. So I thought it needed something extra, and I had some leftover ribbon from another project that I'm going to do some weaving on the front, and I also had some little words that I had from my inkjet printer that I printed out, and I'm going to also fuse that to the front, and I'm going to sew down my ribbon on each side, and then I'm going to sew down each of my sayings that I have on each side. So now that everything is all sewn down, I also added some ribbon to the handles of the bag. It's time to put the bag together, and I'll leave a link in the description on how to put it together, but we will go through it again. So you start by pinning up the bottom seam, and this is the main body of our bag, and we'll sew across the bottom seam of the fabric, and we will press the seam open. Next, we will pin up the side seams of the bag. This is the main body of the bag again, and sew down each of the side seams. And then I press all of my seams open. And now it's on to boxing the corners of the bag. I'll take my side seam, meet it up to my bottom seam, and I'll sew across each side. And then once I'm done sewing, I'm sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to trim each of those box corners, and this helps our bag to sit up really nicely when we're all done. All my seams are pressed open. I turn my bag right sides out, and that's the main body of the bag. And I also added a purse charm. So now it's on to making the lining of our bag. So using our same bag pattern, I pieced the fabric there for my lining of my bag, cut my bag pattern. I also added a magnetic snap, and I added pockets. I'll leave a link in the description on how to add that magnetic snap. With right sides facing, I'm going to pin up the bottom part of my bag, but this time I'm going to leave about a 4 to 5 inch opening so that I can turn the bag right sides out. Once again, I press my seams open. Always press your seams open. With right sides facing, I'm going to pin up each of the side seams of the bag, and I will sew down each of the side seams of the bag. Again, pressing my seams open, I will box those corners, matching that side seam to the bottom seam, sewing across with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, trimming after I've gotten it all sewn. And the lining of my bag is all done. I will leave the lining bag turned wrong side out. I will then place the body of the bag inside the lining so that right sides are facing. I will start by matching that center seam. On each side of the bag, I match each of the centers, and then I will continue to pin that on each side of the centers of the bag on both sides. After that, I match the top part of my handles. I match the top of the handle, and then I continue to pin. If your bag, if each of the lining and the main part of your bag doesn't match exactly, it's okay. You'll trim on the next step. So once you pin your bag together, you're gonna leave at least 6 inches open there on the top of the handle. On both of your handles, leave at least 6 inches. So start sewing 6 inches down from the top of the handle on both sides. And then on the next step, you're going to clip your seams, or I just use my pinking shears and I clip all the way around my bag. And then I can turn it right sides out. So through my 4 to 5 inch opening in my lining, I'm going to take my time and I'm going to turn that bag right side out. The more embellishments you have on the main body of your bag, the longer it'll take for you to take your time to turn it right sides out. So make sure to push your handles down into that opening. And push out each of your boxed corners. And then the next step is to pull those handles through, right sides out. Now this takes a little time to fiddle it through. The more embellishments you have on your handle, the more time it'll take you to get each of the handles right side out. But just take your time and they will eventually come through. Now when you're drafting your bag pattern, feel free to adjust the width of these handles. You can make them as thick as you like. I like mine to be about 2 to 2.5 inches for the width of my handles. So once your handles are out, you can now sew up that bottom opening on your lining. You can do this by hand or by machine. Then put your lining inside the main body of your bag. Next, you're going to press in those seam allowances on that 6-inch opening that you left on each side of the handle. And then you will continue to press all the way around the entire part of the bag. Next, we're going to put our handles, the short ends, we're going to put those right sides facing. So the right sides of the lining of the handle will face, and you're going to sew across the short end of the seam. And then with the right sides facing on the main body of the bag, you're going to pin those in place and sew across the short end of the seam. And then you will press those seams open. And then you will also fold in that seam allowance again and press it down. I'm just clipping it in place just to hold it in for the next step. Again, on your lining, press the seam open and press in that seam allowance on each side. So the next step is to get at least one side of that seam allowance there on the handle, that seam on the inside. So we're going to push our handle, we're going to push it wrong sides out. So pull it in on itself. This is through that 6-inch opening. So you have 6 inches on each side, so 12 inches total. Push it out. And you'll push it out until you get to where you can have that handle to meet for that opening. So I always match my center seams first, and then I go down to my 6-inch opening on each side, pin it in place. And this is the only part of your handle that you didn't trim when you were trimming up on the previous step. So down that side seam, and now you can trim that part of that seam allowance just to reduce the bulk on the handle. Turn it right sides out, and then you will press it in place. So press that seam allowance again. So we're almost done. One more step. You're going to now pin that other part of that seam, that handle opening, you'll pin it closed. I usually stitch this by hand. You can also just close it with the top stitch, but I usually do both. I stitch it by hand, then I do the top stitching on both sides all the way around. Feel free to use a decorative stitch on this part too of the top stitch. But at this point then, your bag is all done. You have your bag is fully lined and it's pieced, so it still has a scrappy look on the lining, and then it has that nice scrappy look on the outside. That ribbon really brings it all together, and we have our purse charm on there, and this is our scrappy fabric boho bag. So I hope you like this, and I hope you give it a try. Thanks for watching.